You're all here to see safe investments, cybersecurity as a catalyst of business transformation. My name's Kate Burnett-Isaacs. I'm the Director of Data Science at Infrastructure Canada. Don't worry, you're not here to see me. I am just your moderator today. So I want to introduce our four panelists here. I'll do a very brief introduction and then get them to say some opening remarks. And then I think we'll kick it off with some questions. And I encourage everyone here to pose questions. You have some brilliant minds in front of you to pick their brains. So first, to the left of me, I have Matt Davies, Chief Technology Officer of Shared Services Canada. Anne Duncan, Chief Information Officer, Department of Energy, United States of America. Matthew Leach from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And Carl Hoods, Group Chief Digital and Information Officer, Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, United Kingdom. So I'm going to open it up to Matt as our first speaker today.
Thank you. So Matt Davies, Chief Technology Officer, Shared Services Canada. I'm coming up on 3 years of being with Shared Services. I will continue to tell folks that it's been a fascinating journey. I'm thrilled to be at this event today. Think it's incredible that we're having a discussion about cybersecurity, truly a global challenge, and we've got folks from around the world joining us today. So I think we're very fortunate to have Anne and Carl here today, and Matt as well. For me, Shared Services Canada, just a little bit of background, walking into it, somebody said Shared Services Canada, and I didn't truly appreciate what I walked into, but when you start to take a look at it, we're almost 10,000 people. That was, when it was created in 2011, it was put together to basically consolidate IT from the 43 different partner departments and try and get a common look and feel, and I think there was some financial benefits, so the CPA side of me feels like, okay, there might be some economies of scale with respect to that. SSC launched in 2019 3.0, which is really trying to drive towards an enterprise view. And when I think about what we've been trying to accomplish from Shared Services, we want to make sure that we're providing all of our services to support our partner departments as they deliver services. And the complexity of our environment, because today we're talking about cyber, I'll go back to, you have 43 different ways of doing things, and now you put it all together into one department. We have 4,000, different, network points, 5,000 different buildings. We have run a network that spans the country and supports our global affairs, our D&D group as well. And you overlay just the sheer size and scale complexity, 8 different public cloud, arrangements that we have in place. It is a vast attack surface, and we have to make sure that we've got a secure and resilient infrastructure in place to make sure that we keep things running to provide those services. It's truly been a fascinating journey, and I look forward to the next couple of years. We continue to look for ways to improve our overall cybersecurity posture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So over to you, Anne.
Great, thank you. So I want to start by just sharing a little bit about what the Department of Energy does, because most people think they know and they don't. We have 97 sites in 27 states, and our mission spans from nuclear non-proliferation and maintaining the nuclear stockpile and building replacement nuclear weapons to managing a bunch of programs that are designed to help with the energy transition. So grants and loans and research to drive the clean energy transition. We manage the power grid in 36 states, and we sell bulk power in those states that are generated by other parts of the federal government. So we're a bulk power provider and a grid operator. And then we have 17 national labs, which we consider to be the United States engine of innovation for the success of new research across the US and around the world. So it's a huge mission, and one that requires a great deal of coordination, because obviously the needs of Berkeley Lab that does open science are very different than the needs of a National Nuclear Security Administration manufacturing facility. So there's a lot of work we do that's very broad and very differentiated across the portfolio. As CIO, I'm responsible for not only IT and technology modernization, but also cybersecurity. So the idea that cybersecurity can in fact be an enabler of IT modernization is an important concept for us. It can at times be a forcing function to say that the technology needs to change because it is no longer can be secured. And those investments in cybersecurity can help us move towards modernization as well as simply making us more secure. So we all agreed as a panel that we were going to try and be brief and get you questions. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we do at DOE later.
Thank you. It's over to you, Matthew.
So my name is Matthew Leach. I have a really unimpressive title there. I work for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. I'm actually the National Chief Technologist for the organization. I've been here for 28 years. And so I'm the vendor on the stage. So I sell solutions to these kind folks as well as all of you in the room. And what's of critical paramount to us at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is that we have to keep innovating, right? We cannot stay static. We have to continue to follow and be ahead of the trends to support the platforms that you all are putting in place. So whether it be the Department of Energy, whether it be Shared Services Canada, whether it be in the UK government sector, we have to continue to push the envelope and stay current, not only for our well-being, but also for yours as well. If we don't continually innovate, then we will fall behind and you ultimately will put your solutions and systems at risk, as you're referring to. We have to keep looking at the trends. We have to keep thinking how we can modernize and move forward. So I have an opportunity to talk to customers all across the country and really try to figure out how it is that we can position our solutions to help you guys move your own business forward, with security being top of mind. We call ourselves the edge to cloud company. As your data is existing in different locations, you talk about different regions and different data centers and different sites. We have to be mindful of how you're stitching those solutions together. And if we don't do that, then we will fall behind and ultimately leaving your systems and your solutions at risk. So thank you for having me here, and I'll transition to you.
Thank you. So yeah, Carl. So aside from vying for one of the longest job titles in the world, which there's another bit to add on to that about integrated corporate services digital. So yeah, we'll keep going with that. So just building on some of those points and for context. So I'm responsible for all of our digital data and technology activity across those two departments. 13 other government organisations also buy my end-user compute service. So we're kind of a small-scale shared service, so that's why Matt and I are going to catch up later on about some horror stories and war stories and some good tips on that side. But we've been through a kind of digital transformation journey for the last 5 and a bit years, which has seen us move to a position which is slightly different to most other government departments in the UK. So for all of the stuff that we manage as a core team, and we won't get into the shadow IT problem, we are fully cloud-based. We have no data centers at all. We consume everything direct over the internet. So we're in a slightly different position. So for us at the moment, having been through some of that journey and moving to zero trust, security posture, etc., for us it's about continuous improvement and continuous investment. And really, I know the topic is about how you secure that investment. Most of our jobs as CIOs and senior IT leaders is convincing other people to invest in something or do something. And that's what we're increasingly seeing ourselves do more and more, is try to explain why it's important that just because we've been through a transformation doesn't mean we can take your foot off the gas. This kind of lumpy investment cycle that we see, often invest because there's a problem, we fix the problem, let's move on to the next problem. We've got to flatten that out so that we've got continuous investment in my mind anyway.
Right. Well, thank you. So very interesting backgrounds and discussion topics to launch of. Certainly, Matt and Anna, what stood out to me was the breadth and size of the organizations that you're trying to oversee and help manage, from all fronts, but cybersecurity in particular. And then for Carl and Matthew, your sort of notions of innovation and continuous improvement, and how does that work and shape the cybersecurity space. So I think it's now time for questions. I will start for questions from the audience. So we do have a couple microphones here. So I invite those with questions to stand up. So maybe I'll get things started with a I do see a question. We've got to wait the full 10 seconds, so please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Andrew Mugoya. I'm from the UK. I'm one of the partners for GGF. I guess my question is around cyber. For a long time, cyber is seen as this almost reactive department where it goes, we protect the state from, from external bad actors. But considering, quantum computing is on the horizon, you've got AI, how much are you looking to the horizon to see, just rather than waiting for that reality to happen, starting to prepare for that almost in a change of paradigm as to how you look at security as opposed to just protecting the perimeter to thinking, how do we make sure that cyber is, I guess what I have in mind is if you think cyber is protecting the state, but with AI, you have the people inside the state might not even know who they're speaking to, for example. So it's a whole different, it's not necessarily they've gotten into the state, they've gotten into people's heads because I think I'm speaking to someone, but I'm not actually speaking to someone, I'm speaking to an avatar. So how is, what are your thoughts on how cyber is starting to think about those changes and how it reacts to that?
Matt, do you want?
Sure. So you touched on a couple of different areas. So artificial intelligence, quantum. I'll hit on both of those too because I think I've had more conversations in the last 3 to 4 months on generative AI and quantum computing. And I think if I look back in all of the industry discussions, I can see trends. When John Kindervag came out with Zero Trust, immediately all the products were now Zero Trust enabled. Then AI came out and a lot of products were now AI enabled. And now I'm having discussions with industry partners about quantum safe solutions. So I feel like, and how they're embedding generative AI into their products and or their service offerings. So I think for me on the cyber front, industry is very quick at responding. And from a government perspective, we are also trying to be very quick at responding and understanding how those technologies are going to play in to improve our overall cyber defense posture. And I think going back to the can we be a catalyst for business transformation? Absolutely. Those technologies and us understanding how they can help us and with the engagement with industry partners, so I'll make a comment about HPE folks, like talking about trends, our industry partners are trying to bring the technologies to the forefront for us and to see whether or not we can apply them to help improve our overall posture moving forward. So we are having those discussions on those emerging technologies. There's no easy solution. When I think about the quantum safe discussions, there's not one industry partner has come out and said, oh, actually we solved that. That was last year's problem. We don't have that problem anymore. That's done. We're now moving on to the next thing. We're not there yet.
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff in that question. So I'll attack a little different angle of that question. And that is cybersecurity by design. So, we can't simply test, we've learned this. We can't test security into a system. We started looking at cybersecurity by design in software, but I think more recently we've realized that hardware is also a place where we need cybersecurity by design, and specifically those systems that, obviously there are no systems left that are hardware without software and firmware. So the ability to evaluate and understand what we're designing and building is hugely important. In fact, Idaho National Lab, which is one of our 17 national labs, has a program called Cyber-Informed Engineering, which is actually about design principles to help people design hardware and software systems that are designed with cybersecurity in mind so that those can be secure by design. And I think the points Matt made about the next big thing are really important. These are, Zero Trust. They're just because a vendor says you're Zero Trust enabled or you're AI enabled or you're quantum safe enabled doesn't mean you are, right? There is, as one of my colleagues says, there is no Zero Trust in a box. There isn't going to be AI in a box or quantum safe computing in a box, right? None of those things are going to happen. So the question is how do we approach those solutions to ensure we're safe and secure? And certainly we are looking at all those things in the U.S. government. We have been looking at quantum computing and what our risks are regarding quantum decryption and how we create quantum safe encryption going forward. And as you said, there are no real answers there yet. We're using everybody's using AI, whether we want them to or not, as we discussed in the session upstairs a little while ago. So we want to make sure that we understand the rules of the road. So we're working on roadmaps and sandboxes for our folks in that space as well. And obviously, tremendous amount of work around Zero Trust. So I will leave it at that.
Well, I think the term that you used about being reactionary to it, right? And I think that's where we're seeing customers are trying to be proactive. And all these technologies and techniques you're talking about, whether it be AI or quantum or whatever that happens to be, I think the landscape needs to change to being less reactionary to the problems that are occurring and more proactive. So I think governance and policy and enforcement is the only way, and it has to come from the top down in terms of blessing or having a support structure from the senior leadership, committing to having a plan for when things go off the rails. And I think you're seeing in small businesses, medium-sized businesses in Canada that are struggling is they don't have a plan in place. So what happens when a cyber event occurs? They don't know. Companies are folding. There's large companies that are going under, having negative implications of cyber attacks. I think the organizations need to have a proactive approach to cyber, admit that it's going to happen. I mean, I'm sure you guys have statistics on how many attacks are coming across your landscapes with your attack surfaces you have. We have to admit that it's there, acknowledge the problem exists, and start developing policies and procedures around it to deal with the inevitable, in all honesty. So I appreciate that. We really want to help customers, and we want all of our industries to transition that and acknowledge it and embrace that this is the new normal now as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think in building on that as well, going back to the investment part, there's something about bringing that to life, and it's a collective responsibility. Cyber isn't just the kind of prevail of CIOs and CTOs, right? But trying to educate a board on something which can be quite ethereal, right? They don't really understand the mechanics of it. I've been lucky and slightly unlucky. Outside of work, I'm on the board of 54 schools across London, and about 18 months, 2 years ago, they had a fairly large ransomware attack. And the CEO phoned me up and said, our CIO's just called me and said we've had a ransomware attack. Should I be worried about this? And it was like, probably should be. Where's your disaster recovery plan? I don't know, let me ring him. Have you phoned NCSC? Have you been through this kind of process? The disaster recovery plan was in the CIO's head. So that didn't really kind of help with getting to grips with it. But going through and being able to explain to my boards the practicalities of the impact of that, even just some of the mechanics of the incident response, having an expert negotiator on the dark web talking to people, this kind of stuff happens and you think, well, unless you've experienced it, it's hard to bring it to life. So again, back to secure an investment, there's nothing more impactful than a horror story to make people sit up and wake up and take notice of it, which is something you can't do all the time. But I think, the power of storytelling and bringing this stuff to life is a really key thing, I think, for senior people when you're looking to get that investment.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great question. We have another question over here.
Do I have to turn it on? Okay, sorry. Joanna Murphy, Security Management and Governance at Shared Services Canada. I'm on Matt Davies' team. So it's not a question for you, Matt, but maybe it's more for Anne and Carl. So in the Government of Canada, we've been doing a lot of proofs of concept in the science space, primarily to create environments that are secure for research and for scientists. So while we've been doing a lot of those POCs and having great success, we also have, I guess, more of your traditional scientists and mentality and culture with very cool equipment that are on-prem. Can you talk a little bit about what your keys to success are for modernizing, bringing that kind of environment that requires a lot of security? So we're talking about IP, important information and research that the Government of Canada needs to protect, but yet bringing it into a zero trust environment that is maybe a little bit more open.
Sure, I think that there's a couple things, right? So protecting that environment is exactly what zero trust is good at, because the whole concept of zero trust is it's just a really fancy name, right, as we all know, for protecting your assets at every level and protecting your most critical assets more than other assets. So I think when you look at those assets, the question is, the assessment of of what kind of data, what kind of intellectual property, what is important in that you want to protect, and then setting up the appropriate system to do that, right? So it's, obviously things like multi-factor authentication, encrypting your data in trust in transit and at rest, and using logging, all those best practices that we all know about. But it's also educating your folks about how to most appropriately use the systems and access those systems, and about what the risks are, because we always say, at least I always say, that our users are our greatest risk, but they're also our best asset if they're well trained. But more importantly, you commented about those assets being on premise, and there is nothing wrong with those assets being on premise. I think we have to look at the cloud as something in our toolkit. Those assets may most appropriately be on premise if that is the place where they're needed, for example, because you get tremendous amounts of data flowing back and forth, and it doesn't make sense to move them to the cloud, or they're not assets that could be supported by a public cloud. Then you'd have to set up your own private cloud infrastructure, and then you question why I would bother doing that somewhere else when I could just keep it on premise. So there's a bunch of reasons there. And also, if this something is somebody else's core competency that they can secure better, then maybe you want to move it to the cloud. But if it's your core competency and you know how it works and you're best able to secure it, then you're probably better off keeping it right where it is. But understanding is the most important thing. What do I have? What are my risks? How do I remediate those? And do my users all understand the system and the risks associated with it?
Yeah, completely agree with Anne's comments there. It's a risk-based approach for us, basically. And we're lucky in some senses, again, that a lot of that work in UK government is through partner organisations and agencies. So, and in that case, it's more reliance on the policy and the guidance and the guardrails that are in place to make sure that once you've done the risk assessment, the kind of mitigating measures you're putting in place are appropriate for that level of data. And then depending on the kind of security classification, and there's a whole other, kind of world of pain to go through in terms of securing that and how you access it. So it is predominantly a risk-based balance with the business requirement and business need type approach for us, but encapsulated in that wider set of principles and transformation journey that you might be on. And there may be multiple tracks for that transformation. So, if it's core end-use compute, you might just say, great, this is how we're going to approach it. If it's more business critical or a different kind of context for the data and the application, then you might have another track alongside it. So it's not trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach to everything, nor do you want a massively divergent one. So that's a typical politician's answer there, in the sense that it could be anything to anybody, right? But I think it's just do what's sensible and pragmatic, I think, for us.
Right, thank you. I don't know if Matthew or Matt, I know they weren't specific questions for you. If you have anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I would add is, for the science community, what I've noticed is that culture, the culture of collaboration. The scientists want to share, and I think the zero trust concept and what Joanna touched on, the applying proof of concepts to them to show them, hey, you can collaborate, you can leverage common tools, and you can do so in a secure manner that allows them to be able to act as the researchers that they want to do. And I feel for us, part of it was gaining that understanding with the science community, making sure that we can bring to the table what are the things that help them, whether it's a common set of tools, a common data repository, the ability to facilitate them to be able to interact freely. It was really trying to get out of their way, but put technology and process and the people in place in order for them to be able to do what they want to do best. And I think it took a little bit of work when we started. Joanna didn't touch on that, but it wasn't the easiest thing to get going. But now, once you build up the trust with the community, the conversations get easier, and I think the collaboration and the cybersecurity posture of the folks is improved. But it involves that trust, that awareness, that discussions, high cyber hygiene, education. There's a big component of that comes into play.
Thank you.
No, next question, sure. Yeah.
All right, we'll go over here.
Can you hear me? Good. Babacar, I'm working for Health Canada as an IT security guy. I have a simple question, and I know Mr. Hoods talked about it earlier. It's regarding the investment that senior management has to do for cybersecurity. I was just curious on knowing what was the strategies you guys use for talking to senior management and making sure that we are less reactive and try to be more proactive in certain situations. So you talked about storylines and stuff, but what are the concrete strategies that you guys did?
Yeah, so I think anything and everything, really, because if you look at a board or senior execs that you've got to try and convince, they're all coming from different starting places with different levels of understanding. So there's been some sessions earlier on today about training and awareness. So we do a set of themes every month where we put on different discussions and topics, and we try and invite as many senior people as possible to come along, just so that it's kind of they're hearing the words and they start to understand it. We've got our audit and risk committees and other kind of normal structural type things that we can go through along with our standard reporting. So some of that gets flagged up in through those mechanisms. But it's about building those relationships. To Matt's point, I think it's that's key. We are a people-based business in technology, right? This is about building that trust, building that rapport with people, so you can have a conversation and really getting a sense that you understand where they're coming from. So that's a kind of one level. The other part I talked about or mentioned earlier is the notion of continuous improvement and continuous investment. I had a conversation with one of my bosses who said, "Well, look, Carl, there was no specific investment for this particular cyber element. We didn't get that from Treasury, so we're not going to be able to do it." And I said, "Well, there was no specific line item in our budget for electricity for the building or for water to come out the taps. So why aren't we treating this as a utility? Why isn't this just we need a level of investment and funding, otherwise we are going to rapidly go backwards." So again, it's part of those continuous conversations. And if you can bring into life, the kind of consequences of not doing something as opposed to doing it, then you're really clear on, look, we've given you a set of options. Our recommendation is go with the good option that we kind of want. But if you don't, then just, be wary. These are the types of things that could happen from that. So there's no one single answer. I've worked with boards that some people like numbers and stats, other people like pictures, they like stories, they like to meet others and be convinced. You've just got to try and work out of that morass of people that you have to try and deal with on a day-to-day basis what's gonna work for them as a collective. But I think just being really clear on the consequences and the options that are available, because sometimes CIOs, I think we're guilty of presenting here's the really wild, mad option. Here's the option you definitely don't want to go to. And look, there's our perfect option sat in the middle. So you've got no option but to do that. So, in choice theory, have 4 or 5 or whatever the number is correct. So at least presentationally gives a sense that you've actually thought about viable options rather than the do nothing, do minimum, go with our favoured one.
And I just want to add, one of the important points Carl has made in there was speaking to them in their own language, right? You can't come into there and speaking about a cybersecurity language if they're people with no cybersecurity background. So talking about risks and benefits and in a language they can understand is hugely important.
Yeah, I think when you're designing solutions of any type, if you're working on a cyber solution, which again is a continuum, it's not a moment in time, it's an evolution, it's a constant diligence towards that. I think you have to define that common set of languages for senior management, right? You have to get buy-in. You have to have that organizational understanding of that. And you have to have where are we now and where do we want to go perspective on cyber, right? You are going to be at a certain place, as you all know, but where do you want to get to eventually in terms of your proactive or your reactive nature to the opportunity? So I think it's building a common set of dialogue, a common set of languages, so everyone on the team is as well-versed as you all are when you're having those conversations, if that's possible. So you can have informed, intelligent conversations with senior leadership, I think.
And bringing it to life as well, for us, it isn't just about the pure work context, both in that schools environment and in the departments that we run tech across. It's about that blurring of boundaries, right? Would you be comfortable with doing these things in your personal life, with your bank account, with personally identifiable information, etc.? So that it just becomes the norm. It isn't we walk into work and then security is somebody else's problem because I've swiped in on the door and that's it. I think it's just again part of that continuous education exercise, which helps everybody in both personal and their kind of working life. Just helps with the underlying narrative that this is a collective responsibility, and we just have to be aware and keep moving forward.
The only thing I would add is just building on the comments by fellow panelists. It is really about communication. And just a little aside, so we just had a conversation about zero trust. I remember I presented zero trust concept to a group of folks, and I had somebody in the room put their hand up and say, why would we adopt a zero trust approach? Why would we not have like complete trust or full trust? Like, why zero? That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And then you realize you're trying to communicate to folks that may not actually know anything about the zero trust approach. And I think to pick up on Carl's comments, I often found it easier to explain, okay, think about somebody getting, into your bank accounts or somebody breaking into your house, and explain it into terms that they will understand in English, not using all the cybersecurity terms, because spend a lot of time, distilling. Within our environment, we have a lot of terms for cyber concepts, then we overlay other terms to explain those terms in different terms. So for the person that just speaks English, it becomes very confusing for them to understand what we're actually trying to tell them. And so I think if you can bring it back to something that they do understand, whether it's their house security or whether it's their personal security, it tends to resonate a lot better than using all of the technical terms that we face every day today.
And we are quite guilty of that, aren't we? As tech folk is to slip into that. Just naturally, everyone's gonna pick it up. It's like, years ago somebody said, "How have you sold blockchain to your board?" Well, I haven't. I haven't sold it, A, for other reasons, but B, it's like, talk about, in that context, was around child safeguarding when I worked at Save the Children. It's like, we need a mechanism of understanding who is going to be on site in a disaster emergency situation. Here are some things that we can do from a technology perspective, in the same way that you don't, have to explain HTTP or SMTP or anything else. So why would people be interested in that at a board level? They're more interested in what are you lot going to be doing to help me with revenue, with protection, with services, etc., whatever the context might be. So I think it's easy to slip into that kind of comfort zone, isn't it, of talking tech acronyms and other things to folk that kind of glaze over, like most of the audience are now when I'm rabbiting on. So.
Right, thank you. We have another question over here.
Yeah, most of you already kind of have touched upon it in terms of the awareness and all that, so I'm just going to segue from that. And we all know that cyber is an expense. So it's always like for us, convincing business, or for that matter, I'll go a level below rather than, departmental security versus CIO or CTO, will go to app dev world. So they want functionality within their realm of things, and where we comes in as an expense. They're producing something for the business, and our angle is from the expense. So how we take that higher level approach, bring it to a level down for especially app world, IT, and at the same time, we can have all the awareness for a normal user, but for the IT, which is actually generating revenue for the business versus us as an expense. Just a comment on it.
So I'm going to just go back to a real world example, app dev world. So I'm going to pick up on, so how many people here drive a vehicle? How many people here drive a vehicle without brakes? That's the point. So when I have discussions around, I want to support application development because you're talking about a sec DevOps cycle versus DevOps cycle. The sec piece, I don't really want to build the security in. I just need to get my development done and out. But if you don't take it in, and we talk about, catalyst for business transformation, you don't want to be rolling it out and then find out, oh, by the way, I didn't put brakes on the car. Yes, I can go really fast, but at some point I actually may want to stop the vehicle. And so that's the example I use to explain, hey, it's important to take security into consideration up front, and that's a real world example I use to explain why it's important.
Yeah, I think there are enough cautionary tales out in the world now of what happens when you don't build in security, that a rational person, now I recognize that in some cases our customer is not always rational when they want to get something done, but I think a rational user can understand with a few of those examples brought to bear that you may not want to be the next person, the next company to find yourself on the front page of the local newspaper or the national newspaper or on the evening news. So I think it's a relatively easy case if you sit down and have a rational conversation. Because the risk is to be like, well, how can you not understand this, and to get upset. And you can't do that. You've got to step back and say, let me explain to you why this is important. And hopefully it's also a matter of, and here are our processes and policies, and we don't skip this. It's helpful if you have that piece as well. But you know, it's much easier to get someone on board than to just hit them with the stick that says you can't do that.
Yeah, application developers never you don't want to influence or tell them how to do their job. You want to empower them with the right tooling and instrumentation and support to work those security paradigms into the things they're building, whether that be an application, whether that be a process flow or whatever. You have to give them options, and you have to encourage them to adhere to these options, or they may not get that funding. As you say, that expense will be redirected to other organizations that will play by the rules. We've made investments in open source, and a lot of app developers are looking at the open source space, and I think that's a terrifying thing for a lot of you probably, because the open source space also leads to insecure solution offerings if you don't take a considerate look at what you're doing and how you're leveraging those tools. So things like Spiffy, Inspire, and other algorithms and other tools and technologies you can use to help build up more robust applications in a security paradigm are really important to look to. So.
Yeah, that's an important point. You know, one of the things we do in the U.S. government is we got a set of rules, and we can say, oh, you need to follow these rules. But what we try to do is we set up processes that make it easy to get through that. So if we set up a DevSecOps pipeline for them and say, use this and use our platform and do this, it's easy. Now you can go and do your own thing and not use our tools and not use our processes, and it's going to be really, really hard, and it's going to cost you money and time, or you can come over here and do this. And so that is a way you can leverage those capabilities to make people want to follow the process and follow the rules.
Yeah, I think that last point goes back to the kind of choice and consequences piece on it, and the same for investment, right? Again, just, you know, for us, it's about taking this away from being something which is a huge choice, right? You're not going to say, no, we don't want to do anything with cyber at all. So within that, then it becomes a level of fidelity about how far do we want to go and what's the balance of risk, and are we happy with the mitigation that we're going to be taking by not investing. But the more that we can move into that non-negotiable, it is just core, this is the cost of us doing business, cost element, then I think that's easier for people to understand. Now, sometimes you've got that hurdle to go over of needing the initial investment to fix a particular problem. But then back to my earlier comment, I think the more you can flatten out that investment cycle to make it more of a continuous investment piece at a lower level, the easier it is. Then almost disappears back into this is our core cost, and then you get into the usual, how do you shave off 10% every year because we've got to be more efficient and effective, et cetera, that kind of stuff. But I think the more you can kind of move it down into that sort of space, the easier it is to then, you can buy your own flexibility within that, because you can make choices as CIO then about what you might do with other platforms and where you might choose to target specific investment. I think if we're going back every time asking for, you know, really minutiae level of detail things, your problem of convincing and getting people to understand becomes inherently bigger, right? If you're going to sit down with a finance CFO and say, hey, we need some investment in for our DevSecOps pipelines, blah, 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 they're going to sit and think, what on earth is this? I'd rather put it towards the front line, go on with that. So I think, again, core of business, if you can articulate that and make sure that people understand that at a macro level and buy yourself the flexibility to do whatever you need to do within it, then that's a better position to be in for me.
So one quick add. I made the comment about brakes, but think about how, take that now and apply it to the fact that most moving vehicles gather so much sensor data that they're housing. And you think about autonomous vehicles, the software upgrades that goes into vehicles, all of that, it just exacerbates the need for making sure that there's security embedded in just the vehicles themselves. So very dated example on the brakes, but think about how much more evolved vehicles are now.
Thank you. So I think we have time for hopefully two more questions. So I think I'll turn over to you.
Hello. I wanted to ask in the eyes of your partners, external partners, how do you sell yourselves as being trustworthy and worth doing business with in terms of cybersecurity?
Do you want me to take that first? As the vendor on the stage, is that one?
Your hand is high in the air.
My hand is high in the air. I'll take that one first. I mean, if you think about HP as a company, we've been around for forever, since 1939. I think we conduct ourselves with a certain level of ethics and quality of product. I think we adhere to standards like NIST. If you're looking at cybersecurity foundational work, we try to develop products and portfolio solutions that we believe are very open and transparent in terms of how we come to market with them, right? How do we convince you of that? I think our experience and our relationships and our products over the years are our best thing to bring forward. So for us, it's proof in our reputation, our name, and these fine folks here, other than the cloud provider here, use our equipment and trust our equipment in terms of solution stacks themselves, right? So our customers are our biggest advocate for us. So from ours, it's our reputation, our product, our quality, and our openness in terms of how we develop and what we develop on your behalf. Sorry about that.
That's right. No. So we're a bit of an experiment in the UK government for running a shared service across the two departments. Now, it's largely because there was a machinery government change in the UK, which basically means somebody decided that they wanted to split departments up and move responsibilities around. So that's a slight quirk from that, but somebody thought it would be a good idea to experiment with the shared services piece and then scale that out if it works. The advantage we've got is, I guess, that 10 other organisations that we didn't ask and we didn't have to sell to came to us and said, look, we've heard great things about your platform and your service that you're offering. What's the cost? We gave them the cost and they said, really, is that the cost? That's half the price I'm currently paying. So we're like, great, that was a good quick win. And then it kind of grew out from there. So we don't actively go and sell our services to other departments or other agencies that exist within our ecosystem. They come to us. So we're in a slightly different position, I guess, than maybe other countries that may be mandated that it's a central initiative, or there are GovCos or other organisations spun up from within inside government, which then go and compete and sell services. So yeah, but again, it's the same thing, right? It's about building that trust and reputation. No one's going to come to us if everything's falling over every 5 minutes and there's been loads of security breaches and data loss everywhere kind of thing. So that's why we're continually looking at maintaining those standards and positioning ourselves as equivalent to an external provider. So we're in continuous conversations with our strategic suppliers about how do you recognize us as an internal supplier in the same way that you would do a gold partner if you're Microsoft or whatever the other kind of equivalents are, which can get a bit of a frustrating conversation because certain vendors basically say, well, you can only do that if you bring us revenue. And we're like, well, we're not bringing you, well, we are, because we're selling your services. Effectively, they're buying it from us. So, but that kind of example is for us to be able to say, look, we are credible. We are investing in our people. We're investing in our continuous development of capability so we can be trusted. It's just part of that kind of marketing with a small m kind of activity that we do in the UK anyway.
We do have one more question, so unless you have a burning comment. No, so last question over to you.
We have a panel that's international and public and private sector. So my question, twofold. How do we enhance public-private partnership, and how do we enhance collaboration in international fora?
So I guess events like this are a great start for doing that. Within our digital team, our leadership team, we go and visit a different organisation every month, either within the public sector or out. And we talk about, we have 3 aims for that. There is how are they organised for delivery, or how are their customers organised for delivery if they're providing services. What are they seeing around innovation, both internally, whether that's their own product innovation or where other markets and other sectors innovating. And how do we create connections, because they're incredibly powerful things to have. So in my team, we're responsible for knowledge and information management, records management across those organisations as well. The person who leads that for me, she's had, as an example, 4 or 5 conversations with Dell's European HR director on change management and how to impact change at scale across organisations. That was a byproduct of having collaboration. and I say, hope I'm going to speak to Matt later on about what shared services in Canada does and how we might take some of that. But for us, it's just about expanding horizons, learning from other sectors, other markets. Half the time we say, don't talk to us about what government's doing. We want to know what's disrupting other sectors so that we can start to think about what that might mean for us going forward. But creating the connections is the most powerful thing in all of that.
Any final thoughts to share?
I think Carl hit it. We're all here. We're talking to each other. So.
Well, thank you, everyone. Just some quick conclusions. Thank you to all the panelists. I think this was extremely informative and certainly a lot of takeaways, particularly on the importance of communication to all those who are impacted, which is, I think, everyone. So thank you, and thank you to all the great questions as well. So hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.